Welcome to the Deep Dive Spirituality Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Brian Russell, and today it's my privilege to bring to you a special solo cast. I'm calling this episode Avoiding the 6 Mistakes That Cause Pastors and Spiritual Leaders to Rust Out. If you listen all the way to the end, you're going to gain some valuable insights, not simply about things to avoid, but also practices to fully embrace so that you and I potentially could be having a conversation 5, 10, 20, 30 years from now, and you're saying, Brian, you won't believe what's happened. These last number of years have been fantastic, and I feel like I'm thriving and flourishing in my ministry, and I'm just as excited about what God's doing right now as I was back when I was first called. Now, this isn't just for pastors. I specifically added spiritual leaders, and by spiritual leader, I'm essentially talking about a committed disciple who wants to practice their faith and help build Jesus' church. Right? And so how do you avoid those 6 mistakes? And in fact, what are those 6 mistakes? Now, before I jump in, I want to remind you that all of the resources that I talk about have links and more information in the show notes, so I invite you to take a look at those. And if you use any of the Amazon links in the show notes, I'd be truly grateful. You can use them even if you don't want a particular book, but if you just buy things on Amazon, because these are affiliate links, and I get a very small royalty, you might say, affiliate payment if you buy something through the link, regardless of what it is, that immediately can be put back into the show and allow me to continue to create really valuable content for you. Also, if you're interested and you're listening to this in the summer of 2024, I'm offering 2 more virtual spiritual growth workshops. The next one is July 24th at noon. It's entitled Contemplative Practices for Busy 21st Century Pastors. Again, you don't necessarily have to be a pastor to attend this, but if you are, you'll get a real benefit from it. And then on August 21st, I'll be offering How to Be Astonished by the Word, Reading Scripture for Deep Transformation. Both of these workshops are available live. I'll be offering them personally at noon Eastern Time on July 24th and on August 21st. But if you're interested and can attend, I invite you to sign up, as you'll be able to get a video of the replay along with all of the tools and resources that I offer. If you're interested, you can see a link in the show notes, or you can simply go to www.brianrussellphd.com/growth workshops and invite you to sign up for that, and you will receive the Zoom link. And I'll also throw in, you can get the spiritual growth workshop that I did back in June. So let's jump back into the podcast, and mistake number 1 that cause pastors and spiritual leaders to rust out. And first, I should describe what a rust out is. I got this idea from Gay Hendricks, and it's the metaphor of what used to happen to cars in the North after long winters. Before there were really effective undercoating, what you would see, because of all the salt that helped remove snow in the North, is cars would literally rust. Their chassis would rust, and at some point you would see an old beater, it hit a pothole or something, and literally the bottom of the car would just fall out because it rusted out. Maybe the engine falls out, an axle falls off, but it was literally just a rust out. And again, that takes a lot of time, and I've noticed that a lot of pastors have been leaving the ministry, and it's usually, they say, because they burned out, but it's like, I don't think we have to worry so much about burnout as we do as about rusting out. So this is for you. And so what are 6 mistakes and how do we avoid them? Well, mistake number 1 is neglecting spiritual formation and growth in grace. To me, this is the number one most important indicator of a person's long-term viability. If you are consistent in fueling your own soul, you'll consistently have the energy and the wisdom to be able to show up and pay attention to what's in front of you and allow God through the Spirit to work through you. When we don't stay deeply rooted in grace, that's when we take more burdens onto ourselves, we take everything personal, and we think we have to do ministry out of our own strength. So a key thing, especially during the busiest seasons and times, and this is a secret that the successful pastors know, is pastors who thrive and flourish always prioritize their spiritual formation and growth in grace. So just do a quick check-in. What sort of spiritual rhythms are you practicing right now? If I were to ask you, what is your key spiritual practice right now here in 2024, what would that be? What's really fueling your soul? Step back and say, what does my soul really need? And also remind you, sometimes the most important formational activity you can do is by eliminating something. It isn't always addition. I know a lot of pastors who actually get ground down because they're actually trying to live out somebody else's spiritual rhythms instead of the actual spiritual rhythms that really fuel them. Like for myself, I'm a professor of biblical studies. That's my main occupation outside of this content creation and coaching that I do. And so I literally get paid to read the Bible. Now, I've learned key practices so I can continue to allow Scripture to fuel me. But there was a season in my life where what I found really fueled me and helped me to grow in grace wasn't just reading more Scripture. It was literally silence and solitude practices, which I still do to this day, which would be centering prayer and intentional journaling or prayer of examine style of journaling. So what is it that fuels your soul? What is it? Do that thing. Pastors who thrive and flourish prioritize their own spiritual formation. Pastors and spiritual leaders who rust out neglect it. All right, number 2. This is related, but this to me is a key indicator. Pastors and spiritual leaders who rust out fail to consistently practice a weekly Sabbath. Matter of fact, I would call this the key spiritual check engine light, if you will, for most pastors. So many of the folks that I coach, at least at the beginning, struggle to take a day off. In fact, it's oftentimes you'll find people saying that their day off ends up being their worst day. Again, that's a smoke signal that something's wrong. And by the way, your Sabbath day, if you're a pastor or a spiritually active person in a local church, cannot be Sunday. That's a work day for most of us. Preaching is hard work. A lot of times committee meetings meet on Sundays. Sometimes there's potluck dinners. Again, those are tiring activities if you're in charge. So what you need to look for is, are you consistently taking off an entire 24-hour period at least once a week? That will be the game-changing activity for you. Because there's a tendency, and again, pastors who rust out will find themselves making excuses. Oh, it was just a busy week. Oh, I'm only doing it for a season. Oh, that person needed me. And yeah, let's get this straight. Jesus did break his own Sabbath on occasion, right? But let's observe a couple of things. First, we're not Jesus, right? And Jesus didn't break Sabbath as a role model for us to break Sabbath and to run ourselves into the ground. He broke Sabbath to demonstrate that there was a bigger kingdom principle around than simply practicing rules for the sake of practicing rules. So take a look at your calendar. When was the last time in a month that you got your day off and you had a full day off 4 weeks in a row? Check on that. Check on that and commit to that, because you want to play a long game, right? Because the danger and the hard part of ministry is that almost everything that we do, you can argue, has eternal purpose and value. But that puts a lot of pressure on us, right? And a lot of times if we're pastors, we actually enjoy the things that we do. It's not like the things that we say yes to aren't things that we enjoy. Now, if you're saying yes to things on your Sabbath that you don't enjoy, that's a whole nother conversation. But do notice that there's a temptation, especially if you really get lit up by ministry, is to keep practicing it and practicing it and practicing it. But friends, I can just tell you, if you want to play long game, how we learn to manage our time and our energy is just as spiritual as all of the ministry work that you'll put in, right? Because we want to play long game in this. So the secrets of a successful pastor are they can unapologetically take a Sabbath pretty much every single week. Again, there are exceptions, but if every week's an exception, you have too many exceptions. Let's just say that. Okay, third thing. Pastors and spiritual leaders who rust out neglect their friends and especially their family. I know too many pastors who can say that they've hurt their marriage because of their ministry, or they've missed multiple things that their children were doing because of their ministry. I've heard grown-up men who are now pastors say that their father was a pastor and they can remember being on vacation and just getting somewhere where somebody calls back home from a funeral, and instead of staying on vacation, they literally jump back in the car, leave a wonderful place just to go back and work more, right? So commit. Pastors who are successful and thrive and flourish for the long term recognize that their family, if they've been blessed with one, and their friendships are just as important, if not more, than the ministry that they're called to do, right? And don't quote me passages where Jesus says he's come to bring brethren against brother and all those kind of things. That's a completely different context where Jesus was talking about the cost of actually converting. Jesus didn't call us, if we have friends and family, to literally destroy those relationships out of somehow a higher devotion to Jesus, right? So if you're married, that means practicing dates with your wife or your husband. If you have children, that means getting the key children activities on your calendar and saying no to everything else. Again, there are exceptions to this. You do have to sometimes miss things from here to here, from here and there, but those things can be negotiated. So take a look at that. Again, and if you want to rust out, always put your family and friends last, right? If you want to thrive and flourish, learn to prioritize those relationships. The fourth thing is pastors and spiritual leaders who rust out never get around to practicing their key gift. I call it their one thing. All of us have a unique gift. All of us get lit up doing certain activities. If you want to do a simple activity, draw 3 boxes. I got this from strategic coach Dan Sullivan. Just draw 3 circles or 3 boxes. And in circle 1, write down everything that you do on a regular basis that literally drains the energy out of you and that you're not really good at anyway. Fill that box up. One of my clients likes to call that the circle of suck. This is the area of your activities that literally suck the life out of you. And you need to be honest with that. In the second circle or box, write down the things that you do that are neutral energy-wise, that you're okay at. But again, these are neutral at best activities. And then in that last circle, and you may have guessed what this is going to be, write down the activities that you absolutely love. You love them so much that you would do them even if you didn't get paid. And if you got to do them, you would be happy no matter what else you had to do during the day. I'm going to call that your one thing, right? And one of the roles that we have as pastors and spiritual leaders is to help other people discover their one thing. If everybody's doing their one thing, I can pretty much tell you we're all going to have everything, right? Now let me talk about what this one thing is. When I was dean at Asbury Seminary, and I had the privilege of being a dean really from the fall of 2012 all the way into the summer of 2021. So I almost did this for 9 years, and I was good at it. I had gifts for certain parts of it, but it took a lot out of me and it really drained me, especially when I had days that were just filled with endless meetings and fixing problems, right? So what I found that, and what made my life better is I actually knew what's my one thing. I love creating content. I like making videos. I like writing. And so what I would do is I would get to my office early enough that I could spend 20 minutes doing centering prayer. And then my assistant knew no one could bother me. And I always took at least an hour. And I simply spent an hour first thing in the morning, either working on one of my books, writing some kind of a blog post, or maybe creating a video either for my students or just for my general YouTube channel. And if I did that, I felt so good about my contribution that I didn't care how I had to spend the rest of my day. And so I had a great day every day because I got to do my one thing. Too many pastors get sucked into this things that I have to do. And oftentimes we have to do things that are sort of soul sucking, energy sucking, right? So make sure that you know what your one thing is, because pastors who are successful and thrive and flourish for the long haul practice their one thing. If it's something like writing, that should be something you do every day. If it's some other activity, find a couple of times in a week. Because again, if you do your one thing, you show up and you surrender that to God. Give God your one thing, God will give you everything. Train everybody in your church to do your one thing, your church will have everything. Okay, the fifth thing that causes pastors to rust out is trying to be all things, to be the hero in your church. And again, I put hero in quotation marks because what we're talking about is too many times we as pastors, we just do little things that make things better, just to turn the noise down, the volume down, to put a quick fire out, instead of doing the thing that we actually know deep down inside will pay dividends for all eternity. And what is that thing? Pastors who thrive and flourish, no matter what else they may be involved in the church, organize their week so that not only are they practicing their one thing, as I said in the previous point, but they're mentoring hands-on a small group of future leaders in their congregation. If you want to change your church culture, if you lament that nobody is around to volunteer, that nobody wants to do anything, here's what you have to do. Realize no one's coming over the hill to save you. You likely don't have the resources to hire more help. And in fact, more help sometimes makes this problem worse. What your church needs, regardless of size, regardless of budget, is you, the spiritual leader. It's especially true if you're the senior pastor. You need to be mentoring 2 to 3 people pretty much all of the time to prepare and train a couple of people each year that then can be engaged in significant mentoring. If you want to cultivate a church of disciple-making disciples, this is the way, hands-on mentoring. Pastors that rust out try to do everything and wonder where all the volunteers are. Pastors that thrive and flourish for the long haul create their own volunteers by investing in the people that are obviously committed, but then giving them the tools and training so they can actually be the hands and feet of mouthpiece of Jesus as well, and then they can do training up on their own. You'll literally change your church culture. It can start with as few as 2 to 3 people that you meet with in a small group, not to do Bible study with per se, but to actually mentor and coach into disciple-making disciples. If you want to have a conversation about that, reach out to me. That's a game changer. The 5th thing that causes pastors to rust out is that they literally fail to have their own community, their own inner circle. Because what happens long-term time in ministry is a lot of time you end up giving most of your energy and attention to the people that need you most. Now, that's part of the job, and I want to be careful that I'm clear what I say here. We're not going to suddenly not serve and bless people, especially those who are desperate for what only God can do, who really need our attention. But here's the thing that has to happen. Don't equate spending time with people in ministry for an inner circle, spending time with an inner circle that actually fuels your soul for ministry. Instead, pastors that thrive and flourish cultivate and participate in an inner circle. And these may or may not be people in your present congregation. They can be, but what you're looking for, or can you find a small group of people? It can be 3, it could be 5, that agrees to meet together for the express purpose of self-accountability, so you can go in and talk about what you're doing, your goals, mutual edification. You can talk through challenges that you have and get sort of the hive mind in there. And also people that are literally just going to encourage you to be on your path because they're walking the same kind of path. And when I talk about this, these are the people that I would describe as hitters. You have your inner circle when you know that the people that are in your group would literally show up in an emergency and help you. To use a sports analogy, what you're looking for the people that when the game's on the line, they want the ball. They're willing to go up in baseball, bottom of the 9th inning, bases loaded, 2 outs, the count's 3-2, and they're willing to pinch hit because they'll swing for the fences when other people say, look, don't put me in. We're looking for the people, if you love soccer, who are willing to take a penalty kick in a high-stakes penalty kick shootout. If we're playing football, we're talking about the quarterback who says, let's go when the game's on the line, is willing to show up and do their thing. That's how you know you have your inner circle, when you found the people that you can count on through thick and thin, and that they will support you. Again, find those folks. Find them. And then the last thing that pastors who rust out, the mistake that they make, is they forget that ministry is a long game. And they give up on what I would call mastery practices. Because the church year can become cyclical. And if you've gone through a couple of church calendar years, if you're in a Methodist system where you get an appointment and you've been through a few appointment cycles, you've gone through the rhythms of the Christian year multiple times, you've preached 3, 4, 5 years, and you have a backlog of sermons, it's easy to start coasting at that point and to think, oh, this is easy. But instead, if you want to thrive and flourish for the long haul, don't give up on mastery. Instead, continue to learn, continue to grow, continue to push yourself, continue to make your sermons the best they can be on a given week. Because there's a temptation, the opposite of mastery, and I'm going to draw from a book that I really like called Mastery by the author's last name is Green. You can check the notes for this. Is the opposite of mastery, which is just committing to long-term growth in a practice to get better and better, is to become a hack, a dabbler, or an obsessive. And I see this in pastors who struggle, right? What's a hack? A hack is the person who gets to a certain level in their growth and then just okay with it, right? So like I play chess and it's one of my hobbies, and I go back and forth between trying to master it by actually studying, and sometimes I'm just a hack. I'm okay, I know a couple of tricks, I know how to get some quick checkmates, I know a couple of different openings, but I'm not really interested in getting better. I'm just going to stay right where I am. And that temptation can come in terms of our teaching, our preaching, and our leading. We just go through the motions that we know will just get the job done. But don't be a hack. Give your people your very best. Sometimes we dabble, though, right? That's if you know people that get like the shiny new object syndrome. It's like you got to read this book, and then you find out a couple weeks later they only read the first couple chapters and they got bored with it, or they'll jump into some ministry, a new opportunity, and then it just kind of runs out of steam because they lose interest. You don't want to be a dabbler either. Again, it's mastery, slow, continuous growth, and you also don't want to be an obsessive. Sometimes it's like, okay, I'm just going to do this by the grit of my teeth. I'm going to get 6 books on this. I'm just going to read everything, and we obsess on so much that, again, what ends up happening there, that actually fuels burnout. Instead, we practice mastery. In the book Mastery, it uses martial arts as a big metaphor for doing this. And when you practice the martial arts, it's about intentional practice. It's about getting super good at the basics, like how to stand. You can think of things like John Wooden, the famous basketball coach, teaching his players how to tie their shoes properly so they wouldn't get blisters. It's being fanatical about the fundamentals and intentionally continuing practice so it becomes more and more effortless and we get better and better. And he tells the story about the founder of judo. I don't remember the man's name, but he was obviously by the end of his life multiple levels of black belt. But when he died, he wanted to be buried with his white belt because he as a symbol that he was committed to learning, and now as he went to the next life, he knew he was starting all over again. I love that. So practice mastery. Again, let's put them positively. What are the 6 secrets of pastors who thrive and flourish? You do this and you avoid the rust out. It's number 1, prioritize your spiritual formation and growth in grace. 2nd, commit to your Sabbath every week. 3, practice your one thing daily, if not multiple times a week. 4, prioritize your friends and your family. 5, mentor a small group. 6, cultivate and participate in an inner circle. And last, practice mastery. So the trick of this whole thing is this is actually 7 key practices of pastors who thrive and flourish. You can laugh. I guess I can't count. I'm realizing, but that makes it fun. I'd love to hear your feedback on this. If you find this helpful, if I can be of service to you, again, I want to toss out again the spiritual growth workshops. Check out in the show notes, brianrussellphd.com/growth workshops. And also, if you're interested in getting into an intentional coaching practice or program that will allow you to put these things into practice, invite you to reach out to me, Brian at brianrussellphd.com, and we can have an intentional conversation. Until next time, friends, live by faith, be known by love, and be a voice of hope to others.